for the second session of this Zoom day. Let me introduce to you Stefan Oehrli. Stefan Oehrli is what I would call one of the most experienced guys out there as a consultant, but not just on Oracle database, but in general on security, because there's nothing worse but having data and trying to make sense of data, but having no means to secure it. And as we've seen, security has been the key thing. Just earlier today, you might have heard that one of the local hospitals confirmed their case of having had an intrusion back in June. Being a potential victim is actually the reality. And I suspect Stefan can help us. He can help us to put our data into the right nest. Maybe it's a database nest, we don't know. So let us know, Stefan, how to secure our beloved services and how to make that with ease, because it shouldn't be any difficult, right?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, and a nice afternoon from my side. Yeah, I will talk about PDB and container security, about what's currently possible and what is possible with 20C and the future. Yeah, I do not have to introduce myself. You can kindly read this later on when you download the presentation. Same with Trivadis itself. So my agenda looks like this. I will make a short introduction in database security in general. Then we discuss a few channels with container-based databases and security, possibilities of risk mitigations and measures. And then I will sum up PDB isolation and security measures, which is already in place and available since Oracle 12. And then again, I do an introduction of the Oracle Nest, and I close my presentation with a summary. So let's start. One basic requirement is know-how requirement is that you are aware about the risks and database threats which are available. I just noted the top level high risks, and you find different sources in the internet. They are more or less always the same. The order is changing from time to time, but the most important thing is that excessive privilege usage and privilege abuse, these belong to top 10 risks, and it's quite critical that that you can do this. Yes, and this is sorry, I just got disturbed. Yeah, and the overall overview is we see here the security features and the possible feature and options, and this is just an overview of what's possible and what's not possible. We're going to focus here on PDB and PDB isolation and the risks we have within this. So this just to start with and to remind you what kind of possibilities you have just around the pure database, like database firewall auditing and etc. etc. What's special with container-based database security and challenge, and especially how much security and how much container databases are used? One reason is that I just have a simple replacement for classical non-CDB, so that I say, oh, I start using a container database, I have 2 free PDBs, and I start using them and setting them up. Or I'm going to consolidate my databases on multiple PDBs. So I'm going to have set up a container database with several hundred PDBs. That's possible. And other cases that I'm going to set up a private DB as a service, public DB as a service. These are kind of use cases which I can use my container databases. And based on this, I have different requirements. In particular, if if I have dedicated corporate structure, so I can consolidate different PDBs in one container database, but they belong to different subdiaries, different security requirements, etc. So this brings certain requirements. Another thing is that we're going to implement this architecture: cloud, hybrid, on-premises, virtual environment, engineered system, etc. So these are different use cases. So the isolation and security requires on different use cases. And this is quite challenging on one side, but on the other side, I do have several opportunities and possibilities. So the risk itself I have, we see it in the graph, we have a few bonds between the PDBs and CDBs and OS. Basically, it goes along with a privilege escalation of a PDB admin, excessive usage of shared resource, so that one PDB is suddenly keeping on and using up the whole CPU resource, memory, etc. That somehow an escape, somebody is making an escape over backup LAN, management LAN, and from there going to somewhere else by executing OS scripts and jobs. So these are all possibilities and the risk which I have when somebody tries to break out of a PDB to OS and become Oracle, or to gain access to another container, for instance, the root container, or to another PDB. So these are typical risks which I have here. Some critical features in this context are in general administration features, the JVM, DBNS scheduler, and external table preprocessor, because these tools allow us to execute scripts and jobs on the OS. Yeah, and then the question is, why at all I do need isolation at all? I have my privilege and so on, but a certain comprehensive privilege in a DB as a service, they allow different things like full DBA role, alter system, different PLS code package like DBMS backup restore, for instance, DBMS file transfer. These are things which are quite risky and could allow to mitigate the security settings and system. Besides this, there are some features on one side, on the other side, some bugs which allow that certain limits and security measures are not secure enough. Like I'm allowed to use an external table preprocessor, and I have the possibility to put a script, and then theoretically I can do quite a lot of things. Or there is a dictionary, a database directory pointing to the Oracle home. If I can access it from the PDB, I can run stuff in the Oracle home, for instance, Perl. And if I can run Perl, I can do quite some nasty thing as Oracle user on the OS. So this is just a few examples. Yeah. The question is, are we alone with this topic? No, we are not. The picture which you see here, that's a picture about Docker security from a presentation I gave a couple of years ago. It's exactly the same issue and risks. There I'm going to have one container, my application. There's the possibility that I escape this container. Use a vulnerability in my binaries, in my libraries, get access to Docker, host OS, infrastructure, etc. So this is exactly, or these are exactly similar risks and problems which we have on other container technology. There we use certain solutions like SecOS, SLLinux, UpArmor, C groups, etc. For now, we do not have this kind of possibilities in the Oracle environment. A few words about risk mitigation and security risks. We have certain things, certain possibilities where we can do and work on. First of all, yeah, I show the picture about onions because this is exactly what we have to do. The security has to build up on certain levels. So we have to implement certain measures on several levels as in a similar way as we have the different onion rings put on each other. So that I can on one side, they're going to secure and correct my data. I know what kind of data I do have. I know my critical tables and application data. This is one thing. I can implement application, secure application development by design. I anyway have to do this when I would like to be compliant to GDPR. I implement classical database hardening on a PDB level, like proper lock accounts, don't give too much rights, privilege, etc. Then we come to the first special topic. It's PDB isolation security. We're going to see later on what's in there. Beside this, we have to do the hardening on the CDB level, CDB hardening, OS hardening, network security, etc. So we have a couple of layers where we have to do a couple of things. It does not all belong to a classical DBA, but at least the DBA has to know certain things. So the DBA is not doing network security in particular, but he has to know what's critical, what's possible. He has to know, I probably have to do network encryption database level, and I have to set up this and that access. I have to limit, for instance, the access to a listener by invited node settings and these kind of things. So there are a lot of things beyond just the pure PDB isolation hardening, which has to be considered anyway, and in particular for multi-tenant environments. The features which we're going to look now into it, there are a few things. Basically, we're going to start with lockdown profile, path prefix, PDB OS credential, and they're going to introduce the DBNS, a new feature introduced by Oracle with the Oracle 20C preview. Yeah, one thing is that we have to do external and internal things, so both are required. I try to split a few things to an internal measure and to an external measure. It's not black and white. It is sometimes it's a bit in a gray zone if something is an internal measure or an external measure. But the idea behind of this is that I really identify things and activities which protect my database within the database. So I can implement a database hardening. I can implement security features like authentication, strong password hashes, a role concept. I'm going to use database vault. These are all things to protect my data within my database. Database vault, for instance, doesn't help if somebody is opening a data file with a hex editor and checking what's in there. Database vault is just to limit or secure my database within the boundaries of the database itself. This applies as well for the lockdown profiles. The lockdown profiles allow me to define fine-grained possibilities and access of certain statements, options, or features. PDB OS credential, that's one which is a little bit gray zone. Basically, I define it within the database, but it is on the other side, it is an effect. The effect is outside of the database. You can see this later on. External measure like OS hardening, encryption, and DBNS, this is really something which we do outside of a database. So we're going to see it also if I have a DB nest, I run my database in a so-called nest, then I do not protect anything within my database. So if a user should not read table table emp from Scott, DB nest doesn't help me. So if I grant him access, then he can read it. So it's completely something else. Yeah, these are the different measures. And at the end of the day, you see the comic, probably you already read the comments on it. All the security measures doesn't help if the PM then sends the whole data unencrypted over the internet by email. But that's then something which we have to fix in the company organization. Okay, PDB isolation and security measures. So what kind of risk mitigation do I have? We have one thing that's the path prefix. It's quite a simple function Or functionality, it's an attribute which I define when I'm going to create a PDB. It's to limit access in certain situations. Another possibility is the OS credential. We're going to see this later on. We're going to limit certain OS interaction in certain situations. And last one of these three measurements is the lockdown profile, which I would say is the most powerful of all. But now, what can I do with them? So path prefix is relatively simple. The idea behind of this is that I can restrict the directory objects to a certain path. So that I define for a PDB a path prefix, which means then that every directory object is then limited to a certain path. It cannot be outside of the path. So the user, the PDB user, they cannot access other directories on the OS. It has to be done at the creation time. I cannot change it. I can allow soft links or not. This is a bit limited, but yeah. The thing is then it changed the way how I use my database a little bit, because I then don't have to give the full path anymore when I create a directory. I have to give the relative path. That's something special, but at the end of the day, I can use my data pump or my other OS interaction as usual. The create file dest is as well defined. The idea is that the creation of the data files is limited to certain directories as well. I'm going to set it, and I'm going to set it during PDB creation, and this does implicitly set the DB creation file dest, which then can also be modified. But the path prefix cannot be modified as soon as the database or the PDB has been created. You see here an example, create a pluggable database, a specified path prefix, and then I can see this in my database properties, the path prefix, and from now all my directories have to be below this path. So if I create a directory with an absolute path, temp test, it doesn't work. And if I create a relative one with the name no prefix, we see then when we check the DBA directories that it has been created below this path prefix. OS access, the second measure, relatively simple. I'm going to define per PDB, PDB OS credential, a credential which is used for OS interaction, particularly DBMS schedule. If this is not defined, the user can always define a credential with DBMS credential. But if you forget it, it will run with the user as it is defined on my database installation, which is by default nobody, but in often cases it has been set to Oracle, which then means that somebody can alter things outside of the database as user Oracle. Parameter has been introduced with Oracle 12.2, and it allows to limit things like external jobs for DBMS scheduler, table preprocessor, and also xproc execution. I can define it globally per PDB or globally for the whole content database, or I can define individually one for each PDB. There are a few bugs around. They have been fixed, in particular for DBMS scheduler, part in the release update. So most of them are fixed, and in particular for DBMS scheduler, they worked quite well. An external table can be disabled by lockdown profile as a workaround or an alternative. It looks like this. I create a DBMS credential, quite simple in the PDB. And then I can set this as a initDORA parameter, and from then on, each DBMS scheduler job implicitly use this credential when it is executed on the OS. That's the way. That's how we're going to add it individually per PDB, so I can create it on the CDB level for all, or individually per PDB. Then lockdown profile, something really interesting and a bit more more possibilities has been introduced by Oracle 12.1 and enhanced in the last releases. The idea is really that I define some rules for individual PDB, all PDBs, or also application container to limit certain activities within the database. I can create it with a statement, create lockdown profile, and then I grant certain rules to it by setting it without the lockdown profile. This has then been enabled by an init parameter. So theoretically, I can create 10 lockdown profile and just activate one. Doesn't harm my database. I can activate it as required. What can I do with the lockdown profile? I have three basic possibilities. One is to lock down options. So I can disable certain options within the database. I can lock down features. These are certain database related features. Or I can even lock down certain SQL statements and statement options and clauses. They can be either explicitly disabled or enabled, so both is possible. I can do a combination with all or except, and can do quite complex lockdown profiles. Since Oracle 18, I also can restrict certain operations to all user, local or common user. And I can create new lockdown profile based on existing ones, so I can reuse them if you want. So the lockdown option, according to the documentation, you can lock down the database queuing and the partitioning option. So either enable all or disable all or enable it. So relatively simple. For instance, this example just creates a lockdown profile which enables the database queuing. This is basically relatively simple. I ran into an issue a couple of weeks ago when I just said, no, I have a lockdown profile where I disable all options. I did this, you see this alter create lockdown profile, set restricted, and I just ran an alter lockdown profile, disable option all. According to the documentation, just database queuing and partitioning is disabled. It has been enabled, and we see it on the next slide. I then tried to create a table space, and suddenly I did get an error. But I was a bit weird because it told me features not enabled. I know this error from for standard edition database where TD is not available, but in a 19C enterprise edition, never see this feature. I just start to struggling around, reverse engineer a couple of things, and at the end of the day, I identified that you have the possibility to even enable certain other options. So you see here another lockdown profile statement where I explicitly enable transparent data encryption, and then I could create my transparent table space. Unfortunately, it's not really documented. As mentioned here and written in red, it is highly undocumented, and use it on your own warranty. After a few sessions of re-engineering, I could identify that in the database libraries there are a few, there's a fixed table with a few statements, and not statements, strings. These strings are related to the feature which I can enable. So we basically can even fine-grain enable even more options like TDE, like advanced compression, like centrally managed user, etc. So it is prepared and it is there, and I could imagine that this is a feature or functionality which somewhere becomes available. I have currently opened a service request because I run into this issue because I disabled option all and I couldn't use TD, and I was somehow wondering why and what happens behind this. Then other features like the clause, it's relatively simple. I have a list of in the documentation of all kind of features like Java, runtime, network access, etc., which I can enable or disable. For instance, here I'm going to disable OS access, but I can enable the trace view access as an example. Yeah. Then the statement, I can really fine-grain, enable and disable certain statement. Also here, enable, disable, and combine them. I can specify the statement clause, and I also can specify the statement option, which means then I can disable alt assistant, for instance, but I could allow alt assistant set cursor sharing. So I can combine this, that I enable a statement in particular, but I allow certain clause of this statement. So the challenging here is that I find the right lockdown profile, the right combination, what exactly I should enable and disable. And just as an example here, that I disable alt assistant, but I allow the kill session, for instance. These are a few things. We have then the feature where I'm going to allow the Java runtime feature. Yeah, this just as a few examples. So there's a few missing things. PDB isolation is internally. I still need a comprehensive security concept, but on the other hand, the resource management is with this feature is not covered. The key management as well, it's out of scope here. And over a specific topic, yeah. And one risk is that if I create a bad lockdown profile, I'm gonna introduce some new issues or flaws in my PDB isolation, just as a reminder. So don't make them too complex, and make them really simple and straightforward, that you know exactly what is enabled and what's not enabled. Now let's come to the last part of my presentation, the DB Nest. DB Nest has been introduced with Oracle 20C, or basically Oracle 20C preview. It's also a hidden feature in 19C. We come to this later. Overall, it is the idea of the DB Nest is that I introduce on the OS level. Oracle calls it Nest, but at the end it's a namespace where my PDB is running in. It is really something similar, like container technologies like runc, Docker, Hotman, etc. are using. So the container itself and the database container or the PDB is then running in a dedicated Linux namespace, and it only sees resources and processes within this namespace. There's also the idea, the plan to introduce C groups as well. With C groups, I can even go further and limit certain resources on a PDB level. You see here the picture from Oracle, from the Oracle documentation, where I have my CDB nest, and within the CDB allows certain things. And for each PDB, I then have an individual nest where I explicitly limit OS and file system access, access to trace files. It is using features on the Linux environment like the seccomp capabilities, etc. So that's the overall process and the overall architecture of DB Nest as it is working. To enable it, no, before we come to enable it, just a few notes about namespace. Also, this is taken from old presentation about Docker security or kernel namespaces or Linux namespaces. This is a feature which allows to isolate certain resources, or it allows the virtualization of certain system resources to, and then, as you see it in the graphic, my container then just sees certain processes within his namespace. So we have the Java, which only sees his Java process and cannot access the other processes which are out of its namespace. For the DB Nest, Oracle launched a dedicated namespace for this nest and keep everything of this PDB within this nest. So this nest sees only its namespace and is limited within there. Control groups, C groups, I mentioned earlier. The idea of C groups is also, it's a kernel feature which is quite a while in the Linux kernel. Also here, heavily used in Docker container environment, and the idea is that I work it on The idea is that I can use it on a limited system resource, that I can say, okay, my container can use 10 gig of memory, or he can run on 2 cores or on 4 cores, so that it really can fine-grained limit certain resources on the environment. The idea behind of this is clear, so that my container in the Docker environment has limited resources available. And the idea is also that something like this is available with Oracle DBNest. Just as an information, the C groups is currently not yet available with DBNest, but that's as far as I understand, it is planned. At least you see different nodes in the parameters and different information, but it's not the official part of the documentation. So we're going to have a short preview on DBNest. To enable it, it is relatively simple. So to enable it, basically, we just have to set a couple of Initora parameters. In particular, there are 2, the DBNest enable and the DBNS PDB configuration parameter. I also have to define a dedicated broker in the listener, and I have to then initialize my nest itself. So Oracle, by the way, Oracle also introduced at least 2 command line tools which I could identify. That's DBNest and DBNest init. So basically, DBNest can be used to create nests, to test nests, to jump into a namespace and to play around and to test a few things. I had to install a couple of OS packages. I haven't yet found any reference in the documentation, but as soon as I have installed this OS package, like the network service caching daemon and the system security service daemon, I was able to enable a nest. Without them, I was not able to enable the nest. So let's configure it. I'm going to set in the listener.dora the dedicated broker, set it on. Then I configure the Initora parameter, use dedicated broker, enable or set it to true. Set the DBNest parameter to CDB resource PDB all, and then I have to restart the database. I can check in my alert log, and I will see a few information, like the one which I noted down here, instance running inside a DBNest. And I also add the other comment where we see that my PDB HR is running in a nest as well, or at least it was opened successfully within a nest. Here you can see an output of the DBNS list. It's basically truncated. We can see it here as well on the command line. If I run a DBNest list, I see that I have 4 namespaces. There is one for my PDB, or basically at least there are 3 created by default, and then there's a 4th one created for my PDB, which is dedicated. And you see here already what's happened here. That I have a file system isolation default configuration. The level is set to strict. And this is what I have just after enable everything which you see, or which we saw on the previous slide. Just a few things. I don't go into the much detail. You can enter the nest with DBNest, which means nothing else than this explicitly or implicitly change the Linux namespace and open a shell. If I run it with DBNest, enter PDB001, that's the nest of the CDB. I can enter it, and then I'm in this namespace, and I can access it immediately. If I do the same with the DBNest PDB003, just going back, the 003 is the one for my PDB. It is like that I see the namespace, and I immediately get an error that the shell is not found, which means the default configuration is in a way that certain folders like the bin folder and the shell as a user bin and bin folder are not available. So there is no shell available. I do not have a shell, which also means then I cannot run stuff on the OS from within this PDB. Short outlook. So DBNS itself has been introduced with 20C preview. So one thing is definitely that this becomes production or becomes available in a main release. Currently, there is really simple documentation in the Oracle documentation to enable it for the file system protection. So there doesn't definitely have to be a few enhancement configuration. An example, for instance, also the errors which are available. So there are currently no metalinks node yet available. So this definitely will evolve over the next weeks and months. Definitely more configuration feature and examples. And the Linux group is something which has to be officially be part. So there are a few things like on the graphic itself, you already see CPU memory, but Oracle has not yet documented, how you can control it. You see some initOra parameter which shows that this will be possible, but it's not yet available. And overall, it has to become more mature, so to be really production ready. But it's definitely something worth to have a look into it because it's relatively easy to protect the database from outside. Now, one special thing, DBNS, I mentioned something about 19C. If you check the hidden parameter, you're going to see that there is a DBNS enable, DBNS file system conf, and some other parameter. And after setting up DBNS on 20C, I just said, why not giving a try? And I took my 19C database and did the same configuration as before. And I was surprised it did work. So you could theoretically enable DBNS already in a 19C database. If you want to test it and engineer it a little bit, gain experience, and you don't have access to a 20C preview, that's okay to test this, but it is definitely a hidden parameter and it's definitely not production ready, but it looks promising, and theoretically it may be possible that Oracle will backport such a feature to 19C, to this long-term release 19C. Yeah, we will see, but definitely it is something nice to see and to test. Yeah, that's more or less all about PDB isolation, DBNest, and so on. Just like to finish my presentation with a short summary. Basically, it's not just an exclusively customer challenge or issue. Oracle itself has similar issues when they set up their cloud product. So also an autonomous database requires certain protection and isolation. So they exactly use the same functionalities for lockdown profiles, path prefix, etc. And these features are nice. They're working. They're productive, ready. There are a few, I would say, bugs or limitation around which can be worked around, which have to be known. In particular, there's no resource management yet available, but it's also not in the focus of lockdown profiles. There is certain risk if you have things like Java installed, because Java is quite heavily and quite security critical within the databases, and it's not protected by PDB-OS credential. I can protect it by lockdown profile to disable it or to disable debugging at least. But if Java is enabled and if you can execute Java classes, then I can do quite some things. Here comes DBNS in place, because DBNS basically does help to protect my database from the outside. It may definitely help with the JVM issue. And the Nest overall, it's really a nice feature, a nice function, and it is not something Oracle specific. So basically it is an Oracle specific feature, but it is not something which is limited to Oracle. It is something which is known in the technology environment, like we know it for Docker, etc., etc. So this is it's just basically just Oracle is using it as well, or start using it as well, something which we know from other technologies. Feature is young, it requires some engineering, and it has to become a bit more publicly available. And yeah, but I would say if you have some time and if you have a 20C preview database, why not having a look and start to play with it? And it looks promising to enhance security on multi-tenant database. So thank you from my side. I'm open to question, but finished a bit earlier, so we have time to question.
Thanks, Stefan. That was really cool. Indeed, we had a question for you from Honey, asking which path prefix, what happens if the database is cloned? Can the path prefix changed while you're doing the clone, or what happens?
Yes, quite a while ago I did test this, but if you clone it, you can create a new path prefix.
Which is very good, because it would reveal something of the originating system, which it shouldn't, right?
Yeah, so that you create a new PDB and on a new environment, and you say, no, I want to have a new path prefix, so that you create it new. So basically, you can even also drop a PDB within a container and recreate it based on the dropped information, and during recreating it, you can create a new path prefix. But the PDB has temporarily moved away from the CDB.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. I mean, it's a thing which is manageable, although not yet perfect. So the lines are open for everyone to raise questions. Please do so. It is actually a relatively new feature. It is actually something which is also further developed. You might have spotted it 2020, but 20C has not appeared anywhere else but in a preview on the cloud. So you can imagine what that means to 20C. The year is over and it's not yet done. So you can expect something new to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Thomas, you already mentioned it. DBNS is really just in the 20C preview. There it is documented, there it is available. And if it's not 20C, you are alone, you are not, it's not documented, and so then it's wise to get in contact with your Oracle representative.
Yeah, I can only recommend doing the following. If anyone is seriously interested to get into this, check the preview or whatever comes next. Mm-hmm. Plus, raise questions with the Oracle teams that serve you, for the simple reason, if we know at Oracle what you need, we can help making it happen. And we've seen that for many Swiss customers or international customers having Swiss headquarters, your voice is really valuable to us. So a lot of things happen just because customers were asking. Mm-hmm. So take that opportunity. So if there is no further questions, I might have one for you, Stefan. It's not a difficult one, actually. It's the simplest of them all. Why would anyone want to have something like a DBNS? What's the use case in reality? What's the kind of thing the DBA, which is not supposed to be a DBA only, needs to take into account? What kind of workload is to be run in there?
It is, how should I say it? Nobody asks why I do have dedicated namespace and C groups within Kubernetes or within the Docker container anymore, because that's quite common and quite usual. So it's somewhere become as well quite usual for Oracle database or container databases as well. Currently, the most interesting feature is that I have the possibility to limit certain resources, so that I can limit a PDB and say my PDB1 just have one core. My PDB2 does have more cores, and the advantage is then that my PDB2, which makes heavy workload, doesn't suddenly consume all the workload on the system. So this is certain one use case, and the other use case is that I definitely can strict OS access from outside, and I don't have to care. And theoretically, I can run Java and say, yeah, then Java's installed. I don't care. They cannot access the OS. And done.
So that's especially useful for anyone in regulated industries, right?
Mm.
Okay, sounds good to me. Please raise your voice for questions. Stefan is still there. He's not interrupted by anything else. That's good.
No,
Customers are not hitting him. The children are not yet asking for a service. So take the opportunity, because Stefan is, as many of the other consultants, very much pressured to deliver for his customers. And this is an unequal opportunity for you.
They were disturbing me, asking me that I play another Ninjago music. So that's why I suddenly stopped talking a while ago, but that's okay.
Absolutely. So no one's raising your voice. I think
Yep.
With that, thanks again, Stefan. Getting that prepared took some time, talking about something which you couldn't check in too much detail out there. Outside the cloud is also challenging. So let's see how this goes. I can tell you there will be future releases. The question is when. We will see very soon.
Yep.
And with that, we enter into the break. During the break, we've prepared something for you.